I'm Jeannie Hoffman. I'm one of the co-directors of the Northwest Regional Spinal Cord Injury Model System, and I want to welcome you tonight to the Spinal Cord Injury Forum. The forums, the video recordings, and our online media content are made possible by grants from the National Institute on Disability and Rehabilitation Research and the Craig H. Nielsen Foundation. Tonight we have the honor of having 4 wonderful people here to join us tonight. And what I'm going to do first is just give some brief introduction on each of our panelists, and then I'm going to let each of them tell a little bit of their own story. Once we're done with that, we'll open it up for questions, and they've all been gracious enough to agree to answer questions. So first tonight I'm going to introduce Barry. Barry has a T6 complete injury that he incurred about 17 years ago in 1991. And I have to say that when I was asking these questions, the only person who didn't give me an exact day when he first started out was Eric, which I thought was really interesting. Everybody does remember all that information, no matter how long ago it was. And he received his injury in a motorcycle crash that he assures me was his fault. Bruce is our next panelist. Bruce, you want to raise your hand? And he's got a C6 incomplete injury. He was injured on March 7th, 2001, and so has been injured about 7 years now and was injured in a skiing accident. Next is Jane. She's easy to pick out in this panel. She has a T12L1 incomplete injury, and while she has feeling and movement below the level of her injury, she has been in a wheelchair for most of her time since injury. She was injured about 26 years ago in 1981 when she fell through the floor of a 40-foot tree house and got to experience a helicopter ride, probably your first one ever, huh? Excellent. And finally we have Eric at the end here. Eric has a C5, C6 complete injury. He was injured about 8 years ago and injured in a skiing accident as well. And so what we've asked them to do tonight is just share a little bit of their story from the time that they were injured until today. And so I'll just turn it over to Barry to get started.
Okay. I was a fishing and hunting guide up in Alaska. I had a pretty sweet gig going. And then every year at the end of our season, I'd go to Mexico for a few months and get my tan back. And then after doing that, I would travel around the U.S. doing the sportsman show circuit, advertising for my lodge. And I was down in Portland doing the sportsman show. And I was on my way from the hotel to the show, and I had an old racing motorcycle. And I came around the corner onto a straightaway, and there was a beautiful road asking me to go fast. So I did. I hit just about 100 miles an hour when one of the vehicles I was passing, because there was 4 of them across the double yellow line, he turned left, and his front bumper hit my back tire when I was doing approximately 100 miles an hour. Threw me off a cliff. I landed on a back flight of, or a cement flight of the stairs back first, and completely destroyed my spinal cord from T6 down. So from that moment, I was a complete injury. Luckily for me, an ambulance happened to be driving by, and one of the women who I passed was a nurse. So she was on the scene in about 15 seconds, had my head strapped down to between her knees, and then an ambulance just happened to drive by, and I was in the hospital in 15 minutes. So after several weeks of the ICU, I ended up in the ortho-neurotrauma unit, and things were a little different back then. I stayed in the hospital for almost 8 months, doing my rehab time and overcoming several different adversities I had dealt with. The surgeon actually put my rods in upside down, so I had to have those taken out and redone. And there were a couple of other complications along with that. But 8 months later, I left the hospital having no idea what I was going to do because I was 6'4". Went from 6'4" to about, 3'5½", maybe 6 on a good day if I stretch, and had absolutely no idea what I was going to do next. Everything that I had known, the fishing and hunting, was now gone in my eyes. The rehab that I was in was fairly negative, very you can't, you won't, and you used to, but now you can't. And I left the hospital having absolutely no idea what life was going to be in store for me. I actually found out that I was paralyzed after having been in the hospital for quite a while, because I was really injured when I got hurt, and there was a lot of morphine involved. And it was actually a morning, I had some guy come and visit me in the hospital who happened to be in a wheelchair. And he was right out of Good Morning Vietnam. Long hair, scrappy beard, smelly jacket. Came in and was doing wheelies in my hospital room, telling me how cool it was to be in a wheelchair. The chicks dig it, things like that. And the one thing that he told me that actually stuck of all of the experience that I had was he said, hey, kid, just set a goal for yourself, and when you reach that goal after you've left here, you'll know that your crash was in the past. Well, it's kind of interesting. So he left, and my nurse, who's still actually one of my very good friends, came in and said, so how was that? And I was like, don't ever bring him back. But, he made me set a goal, and the goal that I set was going to go to Australia. I really want to go to Australia, Val. That's my goal. I'm going to Australia. And she was like, well, that's great, because today you start occupational therapy, and today you're going to learn how to put your socks on. And she laid my socks at the end of the bed, and she walked out. And I thought, oh. So at about that time, the minister came in, and regardless of how religious you are or not, he came in and was rambling on about something that I really wasn't paying much attention to. And then he said, well, I realize it's really hard for a young man your age to be permanently paralyzed. And I just looked at him. And that was how I found out. And I looked at him with that look that he went, okay, well, here's my card if you need anything. And he left. And Valerie had heard that and came back in and picked my socks back up and kind of looked at me and went, you okay? And I was like, oh, what am I supposed to say? No. She's like, do you have any questions? I said, yeah. Am I ever going to walk again, Val? She said, no. Do you have any other questions? No, you pretty much summed it up. Thanks. She laid my socks back down on the end of the bed. Off she went. And that was how I found out that I was going to spend the rest of my life in a chair. And it was a really interesting moment for me because she left so I could be alone so nobody could hear the swearing. And a little while later she came back in and said, so, you let me know if you need anything because your socks are still at the end of the bed, and if you don't want to go to therapy naked today, you should probably figure out how to put those on. And of course she was just kidding, but she motivated me. And it took me a little less than 2 years to land in Australia from that day. It was a little more than 2 years. But I actually kept that goal. And I knew that when I got out of the hospital, I now had a goal that I was going to go accomplish, and it was Australia. And I did everything that I could to get there. I actually went back to school. I finished up school. I learned all the things that I needed to know to get over what it was I was now going to have to deal with. I learned the hard things, the bowel programs, and all the things that they taught me when I was in the hospital. And then I got out, and nothing was the same. Because everything that I had done in the hospital was in that safe environment with a nurse button. And then I got out, and the toilet was different, and the shower was different, and the stove was different. And all those things that I was really comfortable with changed. So I had to learn them again. And then several months later, I got my TLSO off, and it all changed again. And I realized that it was just like it had been before, that every single time I came up against a challenge, you just kind of overcome it. But now it was much more accentuated. And it always seemed negative in the beginning. And then I realized that it didn't have to be. That, yeah, it sucked, and yeah, I didn't want to be here, but there was nothing that I could do about it. So why does it have to be so bad? And I called up my best friend who lived down in Arizona, and I grew up here in Seattle. And I said, dude, come home for Christmas. I just bought a new to me 1968 Mustang. I have a Rottweiler puppy, and I need to go find out what it's like to live in a wheelchair. So he flew home for Christmas, and he and I drove to Tucson. And we lived in a studio apartment that wasn't wheelchair accessible, and every morning he carried me in and put me on the toilet because I couldn't get into the bathroom. And he and I together learned what it was like to be in a wheelchair. And it wasn't easy, and it wasn't fun, even though we laughed a lot because we didn't always make it. But yeah. But it was an interesting perspective on just taking it on. And luckily for me, I had someone who was there to not be afraid to carry me and put me in the places that I needed to be. But at that point, I found out that it's all about asking for help, because when you're in a situation where it's easier for somebody else to help you than it is for you to do it yourself, then ask for help. We are a society where asking for help seems as weakness, and that's just not the case. It's not the case at all. That we are now stronger for having asked for help because now we have 2 individuals or 3 or 4 or a group. So it was an interesting, kind of perspective and learning experience as I went through that first couple of years to get myself to Australia. Well, once I got to Australia and realized that I had just accomplished the goal, then there's this, well, what am I going to do next? So I lived there for a year in the back of a Volkswagen bus, mind you, all in the wheelchair. My best friend was not in the chair, and he came with me, so he carried me places that wheelchairs have never gone and will never go again. We got to the top of one of the most beautiful places I've ever been, and as we got to the top, people took my chair apart, and they carried piece by piece, and guys took turns carrying me up, put me on their backs and carried me like a baby. We got me all the way to the top. They put my chair together, and it rolled off the edge. And it bounced 300 feet down. And I was like, I think you guys are going to be carrying me a lot longer than just down the mountain. I mean, the chair survived, and and we went places that chairs don't go, and nobody said no to me when we were traveling. It was more of how can we, and that was really refreshing, especially in a country where it wasn't very accessible, because Australia wasn't accessible at all, but the attitude overcame the inaccessibility. And then after Brian and I got done with Australia, I wasn't ready to come home yet, so I went to Europe, and I backpacked all over Europe for 18 months by myself. I hitchhiked in the wheelchair. I took trains and buses. I had people who didn't speak the language carry me places, the same language that I do, carry me places. I actually was hitchhiking in Scotland, and a guy stopped in an Austin Mini. And I was with a backpack in the wheelchair and me, and he stopped and he got out, and I think he said, because he was Scottish, I have no idea what he was really saying, was that my car's too small to pick you up. And did you know you were backpacking in a wheelchair? And then out of that, I got that he was actually trying to tell me that his brother was coming by in a truck in about an hour, and that I should go down to the local pub, and that his brother would pick me up. And I think I heard him say that, but I wasn't sure, and it was an excuse to go to the pub. So I wandered down to the pub. I was there for about an hour, and in came this little guy who looked like a leprechaun, and he grabbed my bag and threw it in the back of his Christmas tree truck, and he took me all the way to Inverness, which was about 2.5 hours from where I was. And we got to the town to find that the hostel was up 4 flights of stairs. Right. So he drove me down to the nicest hotel in town and left my wheelchair in the back of the truck and just left me there. And he went in, was gone for about a half an hour, and came out with the manager of the hotel, and they gave me the nicest place in the hotel for the same price I would have paid for the hostel, because the hostel wasn't accessible, and that was unacceptable. So I stayed for a lot longer than I probably would have. So it was interesting in those travels of finding out that, as difficult as it was, by not being afraid to take the challenge, not being afraid to ask for help, and just doing it, that I got to see the world. And I still do now, actually. I have a public speaking company. That's pretty much what I do for a living. And I travel around the world doing motivational speaking, doing corporate speaking, talking to kids about safety and choices and avoiding situations like this, but how to deal with the pressures that you deal with as a kid. And it's been an interesting kind of look back for me, because I've taken this and I've turned it into a career. I had a really interesting experience just recently that I was the keynote for the West Coast Regional Trauma Conference. And what I didn't know was that the 5 nurses, I just got goosebumps, the 5 nurses that took care of me and kept me alive on the ortho-neurotrauma unit down at Emmanuel Hospital in Portland were all in the audience. And they didn't know I was the keynote, and I didn't know they would be there. And I usually tell stories about them when I do things. The socks story, that's Valerie. And the different things that they did, and especially in a setting where I'm talking to nurses and those who are in the profession, they understand the idiosyncrasies that I can talk about when I mention exploding bowel programs and random things like that most people wouldn't understand. And at the end of the presentation, I always open it up for questions and answers. And I actually had a nurse get up and ask me if I could go back to that day that I crashed, would I change it? And in 15 years of keynotes, I've never been asked that question. And it totally caught me off guard. I think it was like 1,100 people in the room, and I didn't know what to say. And that doesn't ever happen to me. And I had one of those moments that you may have seen a movie or a TV show where you watch the entire thing. The guy, he starts the show by walking off the curb, and then you watch the whole show. And the last 2 minutes, they rewind the whole thing, and he walks the other direction. And you're like, oh, I would have wasted my hour. Because you thought you knew what was going on, but you didn't. And I had that moment. It was really strange that I went back to that moment, because I remember the second before I crashed. I saw the blinker. I knew it wasn't going to be good. And I went all the way back to then, and I fast forwarded all the way through my travels and my company and my wife, and I've got 3-year-old twins. And here I am now in front of this group of people who kept me alive, that I idolized for what they did for me. And I looked them all straight in the eyes and went, I wouldn't change it. I am who I am today because of what happened to me. As bad as that was, and still is, because when you have a bad day and you're in this type of a situation, it is accentuated. It really is, and those of you that are here know that. But it was looking at all of those things and putting myself in the place where I am today and going, I am now who I am today because of it, and I've accepted it. And it took a long time to get to that point. I go back and I watch videos of me doing my speaking when I first started with Think First. And I wouldn't admit that it was my fault. And I didn't realize that. I didn't realize that I didn't have what it took to say that I made a mistake. Regardless of what situation you're in, I looked back at that, and then over the course of time, I slowly started taking some onus to what I had actually done. And then that didn't become an issue anymore. It wasn't whether there was any fault at all or not. It was where I am today, and can I accept it? And I got to say yes. I can accept where I'm at right now. And sometimes people ask, well, how do you deal and how do you not compare? Well, it's easy to look back at who I was before and say, I'm a 6'4", this is what I did and who I am. And then say, you know what, I'm not that anymore, and get really upset about it. But it's just that next chapter in the book. And everybody goes on with their lives, and you deal with the hardships that you have. Some are just more obvious. And I just turned the page. And because of it, I've been able to now look forward rather than look back. And, if I look at my story of everything that I've gone through, I don't look back now and wish that things were different, though in some cases, there's a couple of things I wish I could change. But for the most part, it's looking forward and what am I going to do next? And that's what I would recommend. Take it from where it is today and go forward. So anyhow, thank you very much, and I'll pass it along. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. My name is Bruce Hansen, and how tall am I? I'm 6'5", and when I was in the hospital, they used to say to me, "You're really long, aren't you?" When they're trying to find a bed big enough to hold me, my feet would be hanging off or whatever. And what's that? I'll try. If you can't hear me, raise your hand, and I'll try and project. I was injured, she said, 7 years ago in a skiing accident. I was up at Alpental skiing with my daughter, who was at the time 10 years old. And I misjudged some terrain. I took a fairly bad fall. I tumbled and all that. I ended up laying flat on my back, and unlike you, Barry, I knew right away that I had broken my neck, and I knew that my life was changed dramatically. I could not feel, anything below here. It was going. In fact, it actually felt like my feet were still up in the air, and I remember laying there just focusing. I was looking up at the sky, and I could see a few trees, the tops of a few of the trees. And that was probably the most profoundly spiritual experience of my life to this point. Because I knew, one, that at that point I'm thinking I'm probably likely to spend my life in a wheelchair, but I could feel my hands, and I remember I just consciously thought, thank you, God, I can feel my hands. It's enough to build a new life. That was like my first thought. And I don't know why that came into my mind rather than, whatever. You should have gone left instead of right, or, whatever. I didn't. My daughter skied up to me, and I told her, Heather, I'm hurt bad. You need to call for help. Which she did, and there was a doctor skiing 100 yards away, the head of the pulmonary ICU at Virginia Mason, in fact. And he came up, and I was able to tell him, I think I've broken my neck. He asked me if I don't remember a lot of the details, but I do remember also the ski patrol showing up, and I was incredibly worried about my daughter. And I saw one of the ski patrol take her aside, and that just, I had this feeling of tremendous relief to know, okay, she's going to be okay. Now I just am going to focus on surviving. And I just had the feeling like I'm going to make it. I don't know what this means, and but I'm going to make it. And so they put me on a helicopter to Harborview, where I spent 2.5 months. And some of that was literally hell. I spent almost the first month I was there living from breath to breath. I had some very serious pulmonary complications. I think many of you with higher injuries can relate to that. Getting my lungs suctioned time and again. That was of all the things they did to me, and it felt like they did everything they could possibly come up with and more. That was the worst. But I did start getting a little better. The surgery damaged my laryngeal nerve, so I was unable to speak. For most of the time I was there, I couldn't eat. I was on a feeding tube because I couldn't swallow. It was something. And when I left after 2.5 months, I had just been given the okay to eat, I think 5 days before I left, and I was just damn well sure I'm going to eat. I'm not going to have them putting any more of that stuff in the tube, being hooked up at home to the food pump with that brown stuff going into me. I'm going to eat real food, and I did. But I left here, and I remember one of the last days I was working with my physical therapist trying to figure out how to sit up by myself, and I couldn't do it. And I was literally in tears. I was trying, okay, let's try this, roll over on this side and move your arms like this, and I couldn't do it. And I was just, like I say, just so incredibly frustrated. And I went home, and as many of you know, I wanted to do that so much, but it was so hard. It was harder than I thought it was going to be. And we had a care attendant who would come in the mornings and take me through getting up and going, and that would usually take hours, 4 hours maybe, and get me up, and I'd be up and I'd go down in the kitchen, and I'd sit there and maybe the newspaper, and then I'd lean forward and I'd fall asleep on my nose and start drooling all over the newspaper, and and then my kids would come in and I'd just go, God, this is terrible. But I guess I just kept thinking, well, my body did keep responding. When I would push it to try and do something, things would change. And about 4 months after my injury, I had a visit with Barry Goldstein at Harborview, who did did a full neurological exam on me and looked at that and came back and started talking to me. I'm seeing some things about you. There's a chance that you may walk again. Or, he said something like, if you want something that's over on that table, you will get up and you may be able to get up and walk over and pick it up. And I'm just like, I left and I asked my wife, did he really say that? I had just probably 2 weeks before, I had figured out how to sit up by myself, okay? And then I came and had an intake appointment upstairs with Stacia upstairs, and she told me the same thing. And I came here up there to the UW. I came here 3 days a week for almost a year and a half working, and I spent a year and a half fully in the chair, and then started being able to walk with a walker and with crutches. And at 3 years post, I went to the University of Florida and participated in a clinical trial of body weight supported treadmill training. And they put me, for those of you who don't know what it is, they put me in a harness over a treadmill, suspended some of my body weight, and got me walking as fast as I could. They'd work with my legs and my body to get the mechanics and all that right. And they did that to me 5 days a week for 9 weeks as part of this study. And when I went down there, I was walking with forearm crutches, and when I left, I was walking with a cane. And so I just, through the time, I just kept pushing my body, and it kept responding. And I know that's not true of everybody. But what I do know, and when I see people that improve, whatever it is you're pushing at or working with, there's always a way to get a little more. And I'm still finding that today, just getting a little more. Today, I'm on the board of directors at Next Steps Northwest over in Redmond, an exercise and rehab facility for people with paralysis. And I also work out there, and I've lately been working on strengthening some of the muscles that I've got, and they're responding. And I'm sitting here, I am really sore from what Jerry did to me this morning, man. And, it's, that's really something. I'm not sure if I had to do it over again that I'd say yeah, but I've learned a lot about myself and how stubborn and persistent and all that I am, and I'm grateful for that. But for me, this process has really been, for me, about the years of reclaiming my life and my identity and who I am. And I think for me, there's the very physical things I have to do. There's emotional kinds of work. I remember there were times where it seemed like I was perpetually grieving, and I'd push, and then I'd think, well, maybe something else got a little stronger in my body, and I'd wonder, well, I don't know, what have I lost, or what I just don't know. What I've lost or what's going to happen. But I used to think that inside me I had this lake of sadness, and I would just go, kind of in my mind, I would go down and visit this place, and I would sit there and be with my sadness and my grief and my injury and this person that I'm becoming that I don't really know yet. And letting myself do that was not easy, but I found it really helpful, just to recognize that that is part of my experience. It's not all of it. I find even now when I start feeling sad or depressed, it's often because I'm tired, I'm not taking care of myself well, I'm maybe not eating well enough, whatever. That stuff affects me more than it used to. And so if I do those things and take care of myself a little better, it's, my attitude's better. And I'm grateful to know that. Also, I'm married. I have 2 daughters. And the family process was really hard for them. In some ways, I think harder for them than for me. And I got a flash of that. My younger daughter, who was with me when I was skiing, I think 3 years ago now, she tore her ACL in a soccer. She injured her knee in a soccer accident. And I watched her. And it's not the same magnitude, but I just watched her struggle with the pain and the surgery and the rehab and all that, and felt so powerless. And I just wondered, I got an inkling of an appreciation of what my wife and daughters went through watching me just in some ways, maybe, yeah, I was paralyzed. I couldn't move for quite a while. Still, affected by this, but it's like I have some control over it that they don't have. And I have a few choices right now that I can make about my attitude and what I'm going to do and how I'm going to do it. To finish up, what I want to do is just briefly talk about a few things that maybe that I've done that I thought I would never do. That was something they put in here. And I got some pictures. The first two, this is me playing the harmonica. And I've played the harmonica over 20 years. This was actually at a gig about a month ago in West Seattle. A friend of mine brought one of my harmonicas into the hospital shortly after I got out of the respiratory ICU, and I started playing it. And the nurses were going like, "What is that? Whoa, you do that, forget about all the other, the other breathing apparatus they bring." To be able to get out and play. I'm also a bass player, so here's a picture of me, the same gig, playing a bass, and I'll pass these around if you want to look. And with hand function issues at C6, I've had to figure out, especially with my right hand, I don't have much going on at all. But I've figured out how to play. And here's a picture of me on my hand cycle, which I love to get out on that thing because it's really this sense of freedom, and I can go far fast, and it's I love it. What's that? It's a three-wheel. It's a trike, a recumbent trike, powered with arms and upper body, and there's a whole variety of these, with varying. If you're interested, Outdoors for All is a great group to get hooked up with, because I've done that with them. And also, the final thing I thought I would never do, and this picture was taken last Memorial Day this is at the top of the Palmer Glacier on Mount Hood, above the Timberline Lodge. And we're up there skiing together again. And she's now strong enough where she can help me do this. And when I was hurt in the hospital, I just never, I figured that was done. And, still have had some real regrets that I haven't been able to do, but there it is. And she's graduating from high school in a few weeks and going to Seattle U in the fall, and I'm, it's just, I don't know. I feel, in many ways, remarkably blessed to have lived through this and survived, and that's what I have to say.
I'm Jane Ahrens, and I'm about 5'3". I was injured in 1981 out on the Olympic Peninsula in what would probably be called an attractive nuisance. It was a treehouse that this guy that my ex-fiance and I met at the Wooden Boat Show. And I saw the tree house, and it had this really cool looking elevator system where you got on this board and you just did this pulley thing, and it brought you up. It was 2 stories. And I got on the board, and at the time I was like 110 pounds, and so it just like shot up there. And so that I was up at the top of the tree house on this board holding onto this string, rope, I guess. Felt like a string at the time, though. Scared to even move, and so they had to come and just kind of lift me off. And then I thought, how am I going to get down from here? Because I'm afraid of heights. And I remember somehow I ended up going up to the 2nd story. I don't even remember doing that. I was in this kind of altered state of consciousness from, being afraid. There were no walls on this, by the way, either. And I just remember I want to be in the middle of the first floor, and I came down these stairs, and the last step was missing. They were these open steps, and so I had to jump. And I jumped, and where I landed happened to be where a wood stove had sat at one time, so it was already, the floor was rotten. And when I hit it, it just caved in. And to me, it was all in slow motion, and I just fell through. Bruce said something about it being a very spiritual experience when, at the time of his injury. And I also had kind of an experience like that where I felt like there were other entities there who later turned out not to be there. And I got the message or the feeling that I wasn't going to die. And I fell through. I landed on my feet, which kind of just, buckled my back, fell to my back. And then when I was lying there, I thought of the Scarecrow in The Wizard of Oz when the monkeys had, torn all the straw out of him, and he's like, my right leg's over there, my left leg's, just lying there. And fortunately, the people that I was there with didn't do anything stupid, like, try to move me or anything. And unfortunately, there weren't any doctors or nurses nearby. But the medics came, brought me to, this was on the peninsula, brought me to the hospital in Port Townsend. From there, took the helicopter ride into Seattle. They brought me to Harborview, but my boyfriend, his brother had died at Harborview through some kind of nurse neglect. And so he said, she's not going there. And so I ended up going to Virginia Mason and had a really good neurosurgeon, although I was the only person there with a spinal cord injury. And the only, I was in my early 20s. There were like old people with, diabetes, amputees and stuff. And one young guy with a brain injury who was really out of it. I could have come to UW to do rehab, but I would have had to be put on a waiting list, which meant I would have had to be in the hospital a lot longer, and I really wanted to move things along. So I stayed at Virginia Mason, and the therapists, PTs, OTs, the nurses were all, a lot of them were, in the same age group I was in. So basically I kind of bonded with them, but I didn't really know anybody with a spinal cord injury. So, and I got a lot of attention, and I got, everything I wanted, leg braces, whatever. And I was, anything they'd tell me to do, like get up off the floor into your chair, I just do it. I was like the model patient in a way, because I just wanted to, get on with things and get on with my life. Although when that happened, it was really scary to go home. I lived in a house that had 2 flights of stairs to get up to. We had to park around the back and put a ramp in to get into the house. And, I couldn't even go, up through the front yard because of the, 2 flights of stairs. I was living with someone who, our relationship was shaky. This spinal cord injury thing did not cement it. It didn't help things. And so it was, for the next few months, it was kind of living hell. I mean, I even imagined how I would kill this person. I mean, like when he was getting the wheelchair out of the trunk, I'd, take the car out of park, and and so, and he probably imagined the same sort of things about me too. And then I got a car, a big old kind of land barge 71 Impala, and some twist grip hand controls donated to me by PVA, which is a really great organization. And kind of taught myself how to drive. Just went to the high school parking lot where I'd gone to high school, drove around, went out on some back roads, and then came the day that I moved out of that house and drove off in my own car, and it was just like the best feeling. And I was really driven, and I know Barry said something about asking for help and stuff, and that was something that I didn't even entertain as a thought. At the time, I just had to do everything myself, and if somebody said, you can't do that, it just made me want to do it all the more. And so I took up all kinds of things that I normally wouldn't have done. Like I learned how to scuba dive, and took up kayaking, sea kayaking. There's a place out in Woodinville a little bit where they have a riding program for people with disabilities, and I started going there. I mean, I hadn't really even cared about riding horses before that, and competed in a show in Battle Creek, Michigan, horseback riding, and just kind of continued along like that for a while. And then I had traveled before, and was kind of had an adventurous life, and I still wanted to do that. And I was taking Spanish at a community college, and ran into an old friend who happened to be in the class, and we came up with the idea of taking a trip to Mexico. And Mexico is a third world country. It's not very wheelchair accessible. So before we left, I figured out everything I'd need, and she'd practice piggybacking me around because we knew we'd probably run into incidents when getting on and off of buses or into hotels with steps. And so we went to Mexico, and I remember being down there. We had the Lonely Planet guide. You probably know those. And we're on this bus, and my wheelchair's on the top of the bus. And I don't know if, for anybody that's been anywhere like Mexico, they have these really funky old buses with drivers that really like to drive fast. And I'm just sitting there, God, I hope that wheelchair is still up there when we get to our destination. And we got there, and he just stopped like in what looked like the middle of the jungle, and we were the only ones that got off the bus. And we thought, oh God, the chair was still there, and so that was okay. But we ended up going to this little village that we couldn't see it when we got off the bus, but it was just over the hill, and just kind of, it was a great adventure. It was hard, but it was kind of nice to be able to go back and do the things that I used to do. And then a few years later, I also had the dream of going to Australia. And I went to Australia, and I had a boyfriend there, but when I got there, it came clear, like within the first day that this isn't going to work out, And so I thought, oh God, I'm on the other side of the world, and the one person I counted on, I can't count on, and what am I going to do? Am I going to go back? And I decided just to get a plane ticket to Alice Springs, which is in the middle of Australia, and I ended up actually staying there for 3 months and traveling around, short trips on planes, buses, trains, whatever, and it wasn't very accessible, but people were really helpful, and I had a great time. And I guess Chris had asked me, what is something that you didn't think you could do that you ended up doing, and I guess doing that trip really kind of I don't know, made me it did something for me, brought something back to who I am. And even though I went there and at first it was horrible and sad and I didn't know what was going to happen, just doing something on my own like that was I don't know, just kind of changed my life a little bit. And then I came back and I decided, oh, I'm going to become a travel agent because, yeah. So I did that, but it was a little bit more cushy travel than I like or was used to. Although, you get used to that. And it was right around the time the internet was just starting to, people were starting to book their own trips and all that stuff. So there really wasn't much money in the field, and some of it I kind of made me squeamish to see, like, beautiful land in Mexico being, just condo city. So it sort of went against, some of my basic values. And let's see. So now I've gone back to school. I've gotten a degree in library technology, and libraries are good things. They can't, be, go against your values too much. And so that's what I've been doing for the past, 5 years, I guess, and kind of slowed down a bit. It's been just in the past several years that I've learned that it is okay, to ask for help, and it doesn't mean that you're a weak person or that you can't do things. And it was kind of a hard lesson for me to learn that. But I don't know, I think we're all pretty much, interconnected. I mean, when you think about it, and that's a part of it.
So, I'm Eric, and had a ski accident in '99, and basically I was going to school in Montana, Missoula, and my buddies and I were really into backcountry skiing, and we went up in the preseason, and there was a couple feet of powder but no real base, and so there was a lot of rocks where we were at, and we took some snowmobiles up, and I remember telling one of my friends that he shouldn't go down this one place because there was rocks there, and of course I decided to go there myself. And anyways, to make a long story short, I hit some rocks up the top of this couloir and tumbled down quite a ways, breaking my neck in the process. And I don't remember a lot of the fall, just the decision to go down that way. And fortunately, I was wearing a helmet. Otherwise, I'm sure some brain injury would have occurred. But they came to my rescue, and we were kind of a ways out of town, and they weren't able to get a helicopter to us because of the snow. So I was probably on the mountain for a couple hours before they were able to get me on a gurney and down to an ambulance. And my body temperature was about 86 degrees when they finally got me in the ambulance and had to resuscitate me several times. And but I survived. And actually, other than that, I was pretty fortunate the rest of my stay at the hospital. I didn't really have many complications medically, and was hearing some other people's stories. I consider myself very lucky. I don't know what a lot of you guys have been through, but I know that when I was in the hospital, I was very conscious of other people's conditions and how mine compared, and I always felt sort of lucky because there was people with brain injuries, and there was a young woman there with AIDS, and I don't know, I guess even having a spinal cord injury, I felt kind of lucky. But that was at the hospital, and it was a whirlwind tour, I must say. It was no time to rest, and they just keep throwing exercise and activity one after the other. And but the people that I met there were pretty incredible. My nurses and therapists were all very what's the word I'm looking for? Encouraging, I guess. And
better than professional.
Yeah. Very professional, but also very personal and personable. Yeah. So, no complaints. But I was only there for about 3 months. This was 9 years ago, so I guess it was a little different than they did it back in the old days. But they whisked me away, and I still crack up thinking about the last day that I was there. I had a buddy that showed up, asked him to help me move, and he showed up with one of those kind of back braces that the movers wear, the black kind of stretchy thing, and he had like safety goggles on that people wear in shop class, and mesh bag hat and stuff. I don't know. It was just kind of a joke, but it was pretty funny to make light of a sort of serious situation, I guess. But getting home was a mixed blessing, I think. I moved back in with my parents after living on my own at school, and I actually still live there now. It's one of my goals to move out. I've been looking for a new place since February. But I just lost my benefits recently, so having to recalculate expenses and whatnot. I should be able to afford some lean-to underneath one of the overpasses. I've got a couple places scoped out right now to look into the squatters' rights and stuff. But so anyways, I'm jumping ahead a bit. Yeah, moving back home. It was completely different than I thought it was going to be. I think one of you guys mentioned how being at the hospital was different, but it was really hard. I just remember being not really knowing what to do, I guess. I took classes for a couple quarters. My art teacher at school was on sabbatical, so I met with her frequently, and that was one of the carryovers that I had from my old life, so to speak, was art, and it's the one thing I've pretty much carried through to this day. I work at this place called Giant Campus, which does summer computer camps for kids, and I'm a graphic designer and also help out with the curriculum and instructional design and video games and game modding. But so that's pretty much that. Trying to think of some other things.
What have you done? Everybody else has kind of talked about something that they didn't think they were going to be able to do again. Is there things that you've either gone back to or things you've tried that you never would have thought you would try?
Well, I never thought I'd own a minivan. And
A lot of us.
it does have a spoiler on it. It's the sport edition, so But I never thought I'd work behind a computer all day either. That was all my interests. I think before were in the outdoors, be it skiing, snowboarding, mountain biking, climbing, mountaineering, etc. But as far as accomplishments, I got employed by this company a year and a half ago, and it was probably my greatest accomplishment. It was really, I had spent pretty much my entire life up until my accident avoiding work in any way possible, and pretty much all the time after it trying to figure out what the hell I was going to do and how I was going to find work and what I was going to do. So finally finding something, a real career type occupation, was a huge leap for me. And
Becoming an adult.
yeah, wow. I never thought it would happen, and I still try to fight that to this day with my preoccupation with video games, but yeah, it's a good thing. I don't know. Kind of trying to blank on other stuff to talk about. It's not my usual thing. It's like 30 people here all looking at me.
So we can direct it to opening up to questions.
Sounds good to me. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Eric.
Yeah.
I'm a physical therapist, so I'm always fascinated at, if you guys could just name one thing, and there's probably several, but what is the one factor that made you not, like, all of you guys have moved on. You've all gone on and kind of, you look to your future. Is it your families that kept you going? Is it that you had financial resources? Is it religion? But what made you not go down the road of, you know what, just giving up and turning to drugs or turning to, because often when I work with people, I just sit there and I say, are they going to get on that road? Like, which path are they going to take? And I just want to know what's the magic factor. So, can you answer that?
Well, since I have the mic, I guess I'll answer first.
You can use that one as well too, you guys. I'm sure.
Well, I guess family and friends are part of it. Having a good, support system, or I don't know. Maybe it's just some hard wiring too. Like like I said before, when somebody told me, I couldn't do something, it would just make me want to do it all the more. And I think a lot of people that get spinal cord injuries are people that are already kind of out doing, and so, and that's not to say that you don't have bad days and you don't get depressed and you don't just wonder if, it's worth it. That still happens. I mean, that happens to even able-bodied people sometimes. So I guess for me, it's just kind of hard wiring and support of friends and family.
It's the exact same thing for me. Attitude is the initial. I just have that attitude that I'm going to do it no matter what. And the second was that from the get-go, I had a support group that wasn't afraid to pick me up and carry me and change me on the hood of my car when necessary. So a lot of it had to do with those exact same two things that you talked about.
Yeah, I would say similar things. I'm thinking of two things that happened to me. One was when I was laying in the snow knowing that I was hurt. In my past, I have alcoholism and drug addiction in my past. I've been clean and sober since I was 20 years old. And so at the time, I remember just thinking, that I've got these resources from doing that for a long time, from being also a member of the church that I go to, I think for 15 years, and like I say, clean and sober at that time, like 25 years, and just having those resources. And I remember then being in the hospital, and I got the idea that, I could get drunk. I really could get drunk here. Now, I'm paralyzed. I'm laying in the bed. I can't move. I can't swallow, and all this. But I just had this, and I remember just having this feeling like, this really warm thing. I can get drunk. And then, I just started thinking it through, which is something I've learned to do. And I realized, were I to take a drink, I would die. And I wanted to live.
I think what kept me on a positive track was being able to hold on to microphones. Okay, here we go. Okay.
You don't have to work with it. Here, there we go.
Thank you. Great support, and my folks were there almost every day. So, but had they not been, I think just sort of stubbornness and pride, and also being young. I was 22 when I had my accident, and there was so much that I still wanted to experience that even doing so in a wheelchair, I felt like it wasn't really fair to give up on the rest that life had to offer. And then I sort of had to pay my dues because I had chosen this course, and as they say, you make your bed and you have to sleep in it. But I don't know. I can't think of anything else.
The answer is partially implicit in what you've said, but was there any effort to make a conscious opportunity to be somebody different when you came out on the other side? You're so close to death it could almost be like a reborn experience. Did you ever look upon it as an opportunity in that particular regard?
Actually, for me, the goal was to remain the exact same person that I was before. And that was one of the challenges that I put to myself when I realized that everybody was going to now look at a guy in a wheelchair. And thought, I consciously thought about that, of how are people going to look at me now? Are they going to look at this guy in a wheelchair? Are they going to see Barry? And just recently after I had left the hospital, I ended up at a party, and a bunch of my friends from high school were there, and this one girl I hadn't seen for years came and sat down next to me on the couch, and a friend of mine was in my chair. And after about an hour of the two of us talking, I realized I had to go to the bathroom, so I was like, somebody, can you go get Brian? He's sitting in my wheelchair. And she went, what? I said, well, actually, that chair over there, that's mine. That's not his. He's just doing wheelies in it. And she went, oh, my gosh, I had no idea. And I knew that I had accomplished that. That we had talked for an hour, and she had no idea that I was in a chair. So for me, it was just the opposite in the beginning, was that, no, I wanted to stay Barry, and I just happened to be in a chair.
And, what advice would you have for people with new spinal cord injuries that might be watching the video in the future, trying to decide how they're going to adapt in their situations?
Well, I spoke about this a little bit earlier about how it doesn't demean you to, to ask for help. On the other hand, you shouldn't always ask for help. You should see if you can do something. Don't lose your sense of self, even if there's like ignorant people around you who, think you're just a box on wheels or something. Just I don't know, just remember who you are, I guess. And I was just thinking about something a little while ago, and people had said this to me when I was first injured, that I didn't really blame anybody. I felt like the people around me, a lot of the people, even, the people that loved me, my parents blamed the boyfriend blamed the guy that owned the tree house. Everybody was looking for somebody to blame, and I thought about that a lot, and I kind of blamed physics, I guess, Yeah.
Damn you, math.
And, and I've heard that in all of us here, that everybody kind of has accepted responsibility for, where they are, With Barry with the 100-mile-per-hour motorcycle, and, just, I don't know, that's what I've heard. And I thought, that probably is a vital thing, I
guess if I had a piece of advice to give to people new, or at least maybe there's a number of things in there, but for me it was always, and still is always, about doing the next thing, doing what's in front of me, the next little step. And I guess early on I didn't have a real sense of how much time it takes to get well from a serious injury. It takes a long time. And I got in Harborview, and they did my surgery, and I was saying, okay, get me up to the rehab floor. I just want to do this and get out of here. A couple weeks, 3 weeks, or, I had no appreciation for how, seriously injured I was, and that it's like running a marathon, and then it's like when you finish there's another one, but it's just step by step by step. It's one little step at a time. And maybe I can't run, I have to walk, and maybe I wake up someday and it feels like I'm back at square one. and frustrated. And I remember like one day at home in my chair, I have a bladder accident. I pee all over myself as I'm trying to cath and this and that. And I just got so mad, and I transferred onto the toilet, and I took my wheelchair apart, and I threw all the pieces all over the bathroom. And I bounced the tires off the wall of the shower, and I'm screaming and hollering, and my wife and kids are down in the kitchen. I don't know what they were thinking, but they said they were partly scared, and part of them were like cheering, like, yeah, you tell this thing. I mean, there are times where you just, I just had to be mad, and let myself be mad at this injury and the whole thing.
Easy for me to just say ditto all the way across the board. Don't be afraid of your emotions, and that's a huge thing, because, like you just said, don't be afraid to be mad, but don't be afraid to be happy. Don't be afraid to have fun. And actually, the thing I usually close with is, don't be afraid to have fun, and to smile, and to laugh, and to do the things that you enjoy doing. You're in a different setting now than you ever expected that you would be in. But that doesn't stop you from being a happy person, And it was like you were talking about going down, Bruce, and like being next to that lake of sorrow, and that's a great vent. And then not being afraid to step up and go find that beautiful lake of serenity and happiness. And for me, I've talked about a little bit about the goal setting and a little bit about the asking for help. But for me, literally, what gets me going is having a good time. And for me now, I have 2-3-year-old little monsters that, if my wife's not trying to like pull my son out of the cupboards, I love watching that, and I enjoy that aspect of my life so much that I'm continuously smiling. And I think about all the hardship and the negativity and all the things that people kind of utilize to characterize a situation like those of us that are in, but just don't be afraid to smile. And even when you're in the thick of how negative it is, think about something that makes you happy, and don't be afraid to step back and look at it from a different perspective. And that's what I wish somebody had told me from the beginning. Don't be afraid to smile, because smiling makes you happy, and making you happy even when you're in a bad situation helps you overcome that. And people smile back. No, it's true. It projects. It really does. Yeah.
But what about all of the PTs and OTs and psychologists and physicians? Is there a piece of advice that you would give to them working with people that are newly injured that maybe you took from?
Actually, what I usually say is thank you. I mean, literally, it's because of what those individuals do, it helps us get better faster. Literally. And it's also the significant others and the families and those who are there to support those of us who are in the situations, because it's that asking for help thing. Even when we don't necessarily think that we want the help. My mom actually left her job and moved to Portland when I crashed, and one of her clients got her an apartment, and she lived with me in the hospital. And it got to the point where I had to kick her out because she's driving me crazy. But that first 3 months, she kept me alive. And with her and the nurses and everything, they had no idea the impact they truly had on me. So it's just thank you for what you do, because without all of that support, we couldn't do it by ourselves. Even when we're trying to be independent, we have to have those around us. Yeah.
Okay, what I would say is don't take everything personally. I remember, like these guys were talking about when they finally figured out what situation they were in, and I was flat on my back for, basically for 3 weeks, waiting for a body cast. And when I finally got it and sat up and realized, what the situation was, I got so mad at my PT, like she was the first one there for me to kind of, lash out at, and, and then I realized what I'd done. So I would just say, if that happens, it's not because of you.
Well, I would say two things. I would agree with Barry. Thank you. The ones, the people that really helped me and pushed me were amazing. There were some that were pessimistic and said things, well, when I was at Harborview, it seemed like it was the nurses who knew really what was going on, and I think my PT did. But fairly early on, there was one nurse who was talking about my feet, saying, you got to take care of, put the splint on because he's going to need those. I can tell he's going to be a walker, and it's like, you're crazy. So I guess the message would be, don't put limits, because you don't know. My family was just so incredibly important to me. Family, friends, other people. A big thing was being there. Being there, being with me. I also think that I am an independent sort, and for me it's like, don't do things for me that I can do.
When I first got home, my friends would actually go out and do things that they knew I couldn't do, so they wouldn't tell me. So they would go hiking, and they would all just disappear for the weekend. And I had no idea where they all went because they didn't want me to feel bad about the fact that they were going to go hiking and do something that I couldn't do. So I learned really fast, and I talked with them and my family that it was about communication. That my mom shouldn't be afraid to ask me what I can and can't do in a certain situation, so then she knows whether she should help or not. And it was with my friends, it was with my family, and with my therapists and nurses in the beginning as well. That communication factor was huge, because the more that we talked about it, to the point that I wanted to talk about it, the more they understood of how I was feeling, and then they would know when to help and when not to. And my friends learned fast. They would then tell me, "Hey, we're going to go, do this. I don't know if you're going to make it." It's like, that's fine. I don't feel like doing that anyhow. And I would do something else. So I think communication is key, when it comes to that, and really talking back and forth about it, because there's an opportunity to kind of hold it inside and not want to talk about it, because it could bring up some bad feelings, or you might cross the line sometimes. But that's all right. I think that whole communication thing is really important.
Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I just have one other thought is, don't be afraid to seek professional help. My wife and I spent some time working with a psychotherapist as we, 'cause this thing touches at our core, at who we are, and that was immensely valuable to us. In working through things both related to the accident and my injury, but also just other stuff about us as people trying to be together.